Welcome to Chapter 0, where you can find a synopsis of the novel. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, 1938, extended summary. Opening note. Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again. The narrator, a young woman whose first name is never revealed, speaks from an unspecified time in the future. She and her husband, Maxim de Winter, now live in quiet exile in a small hotel somewhere in southern Europe. Manderley, the great Cornish estate that once defined both of their lives, has been destroyed by fire. What follows is her recollection of how she came to Manderley, how she lived in the shadow of Maxim's first wife, Rebecca, and how the truth about Rebecca's death changed everything. Part 1, Monte Carlo. The narrator begins her story in Monte Carlo, where she works as a paid companion to Mrs. Van Hopper, a vulgar, gossipy, social climbing American woman. The narrator is in her early 20s, shy, awkward, and socially invisible. She has no family and no money. At the same hotel is Maxim de Winter, a man in his early 40s, owner of the famous estate Manderley in Cornwall. He is a widower. His wife, Rebecca, drowned in a sailing accident in a cove near Manderley about a year before. The newspapers called it a tragic accident. Maxim has a reputation for being aloof, melancholy, and difficult. When Mrs. Van Hopper falls ill with influenza, the narrator is left on her own. Maxim unexpectedly asks her to join him for drives and meals. He is often abrupt and moody, but occasionally shows her sudden kindness. She finds him both frightening and fascinating. He tells her little about himself, but she notices how people in the hotel treat him with a mixture of deference and pity because of Rebecca's death. Mrs. Van Hopper recovers and announces they will leave for New York. On the morning of their departure, Maxim proposes marriage to the narrator. She is stunned. She has no illusions that he loves her. She thinks he is lonely and wants a quiet companion. But she says yes. Mrs. Van Hopper is outraged, warns her that she will be miserable, but the narrator leaves with Maxim that day. They marry and, after a honeymoon in Italy, travel to Manderley. Part 2, Arrival at Manderley. Manderley is more than a house. It is a legend in Cornwall, a beautiful Georgian mansion set in a valley that runs down to the sea, surrounded by woods and famous rhododendron gardens. It has been in the de Winter family for generations. The estate has a private cove with a beach cottage where boats are kept. The staff is large, and the household is run with rigid formality. The most important figure among the servants is Mrs. Danvers. She is tall, thin, pale, with hollow eyes and a skull-like face. She had been Rebecca's maid since Rebecca was a child and became housekeeper when Rebecca married Maxim. Mrs. Danvers is utterly devoted to Rebecca's memory. From the moment the new Mrs. de Winter arrives, she feels like an intruder. The servants compare her to Rebecca, usually silently, but sometimes openly. Frith, the butler, and the others are polite but distant. Mrs. Danvers is cold and barely conceals her contempt. She keeps Rebecca's rooms in the West Wing exactly as they were on the day Rebecca died. The monogram R is everywhere, on stationery, handkerchiefs, pillows, and a large embroidery frame. The narrator does not know how to behave as the mistress of Manderley. She is uncertain when to speak to the staff, what to order for meals, how to entertain guests. She accidentally breaks a small china cupid from a set in the morning room. She later learns it was one of Rebecca's favorite ornaments. Mrs. Danvers does not accuse her, but her silence is worse than words. Maxim is often away on estate business or lost in thought. When he is home, he can be tender, but he also has sudden fits of anger or abstraction. The narrator becomes convinced that he is still in love with Rebecca. She begins to obsess over Rebecca's qualities, her beauty, her skill as a hostess, her talent for sailing, her ability to ride, her knowledge of plants, her handwriting, which the servants still copy for menus and place cards. Part 3: The Shadow of Rebecca. The narrator meets more people who knew Rebecca. Maxim's grandmother, still called Granny, is old and blind but remembers Rebecca's voice and touch. Maxim's sister, Beatrice, is a large, loud, kind woman married to Giles, a good-natured but slow man. Beatrice tells the narrator not to worry about the past, but she also constantly mentions Rebecca's charm and competence. Frank Crawley, the estate manager, is quiet, loyal, and kind to the narrator. He worked closely with both Maxim and Rebecca. From him, the narrator learns that Rebecca transformed Manderley. She organized the gardens, restored rooms, and made the estate famous for its summer parties. She was adored by the local people. Mrs. Danvers continues her psychological campaign. She takes the narrator on a tour of the West Wing and shows her Rebecca's bedroom. The room is preserved like a shrine, Rebecca's nightgown on the bed, her brushes on the dressing table, her clothes in the wardrobe, her slippers by the fire. Mrs. Danvers strokes Rebecca's clothes and tells the narrator, "You could never be Mrs. de Winter. You have no personality, no beauty." The narrator's sense of inferiority deepens. She imagines Rebecca everywhere, in the sound of the sea, in the scent of azaleas, in the handwriting on old notes. She dreams of Rebecca. She fears that Maxim compares her to Rebecca every day and finds her wanting. One day, Ben, a local man with a mental disability, tells the narrator he saw her come back from the sea. He is frightened. The narrator realizes that Rebecca's presence is so strong that even the local people feel haunted. Part 4: The Costume Ball and the Shipwreck. To please the narrator, Maxim agrees to revive the Manderley tradition of a fancy dress ball. The narrator is excited but nervous. She does not know what to wear. Mrs. Danvers suggests she copy the costume in a portrait in the gallery, a white gown and hat worn by a de Winter ancestor. The narrator thinks it is a wonderful idea and has the costume made in London, keeping it secret. On the night of the ball, she descends the staircase in the costume, expecting Maxim to be pleased. Instead, he is furious. He orders her to change immediately. Beatrice is shocked and pales. The narrator runs upstairs and changes into a plain dress. Frank Crawley later tells her the truth: Rebecca wore the exact same costume at the last Manderley ball, the year before she died. Mrs. Danvers deliberately suggested it to humiliate her. Before the narrator can recover, rockets are fired from the coast. A ship has run aground in the fog near the cove. The ball ends in confusion. During the salvage operations, a diver examining the ship's hull discovers something else on the seabed: the remains of Rebecca's sailing boat. The boat was thought to have sunk in a storm, but it is found to have been deliberately scuttled. Holes were made in the planking. Inside the cabin is a body, later identified as Rebecca's. This discovery changes everything. Until now, everyone believed Rebecca's body had washed ashore 2 months after she disappeared and had been buried in the family crypt. That body was misidentified. Rebecca has been at the bottom of the sea all along. Part 5: The Truth. That night, in the beach cottage, Maxim confesses everything to the narrator. He tells her that he never loved Rebecca. Their marriage was a lie. On their honeymoon, Rebecca told him she despised him. She said she would make Manderley the most famous house in the county, but she would live her own life. She had many lovers, including her cousin Jack Favell, and others in London. She used Manderley as a respectable cover. Maxim endured the marriage because of family pride and because he did not want a scandal. But he grew to hate her. On the night she died, she called him to the cottage. She told him she was pregnant by another man and intended to raise the child at Manderley as a de Winter heir. In a moment of rage, Maxim shot her. He then carried her body to the boat, sailed it out, put the body in the cabin, drove nails into the planking, and sank it. He returned to the house and pretended she had gone sailing and been lost in a storm. The narrator's reaction is not horror but relief. She realizes that Maxim never loved Rebecca. The coldness she sensed was not grief for Rebecca, but guilt and hatred. For the first time, she feels strong. She tells Maxim, "Rebecca is dead. She can't hurt us anymore." She finally becomes Mrs. de Winter in her own mind. Part 6: Investigation and Revelation. An inquest is held. The coroner returns a verdict of suicide, based on the evidence that the boat was deliberately sunk. But Jack Favell appears. He is a spiv, a gambler, and was Rebecca's lover. He does not believe she killed herself. He tries to blackmail Maxim. He produces a note from Rebecca, dated the day she died. "I have something to tell you. I need to see you tonight at the cottage." Favell forces the magistrate, Colonel Julian, to reopen the case. They go to London to interview the doctor Rebecca visited on the day of her death. Everyone assumes she went to confirm her pregnancy. But the doctor, Baker, reveals the truth: Rebecca was not pregnant. She had advanced cancer of the uterus. She was infertile and had only months to live. This revelation reframes everything. Favell's accusation of murder collapses. The suicide theory becomes plausible again. Rebecca, knowing she was dying, may have provoked Maxim into killing her to free him, or she intended to die at sea. The case is closed. Part 7: The Fire. Maxim and the narrator drive back from London to Manderley. As they come over the hill, they see the horizon is red. A servant meets them. Manderley is on fire. Mrs. Danvers has disappeared. It is implied that she set the house alight rather than let another woman live there. The narrator and Maxim watch their home burn. The novel returns to the present. The narrator and Maxim live in exile, moving from hotel to hotel. She no longer dreams of Rebecca, but of Manderley. She has changed. She is no longer the shy girl from Monte Carlo. She is a woman who has faced murder, blackmail, and ruin and survived. But Manderley is gone, and with it, the last traces of Rebecca. Themes and analysis. Identity: the narrator has no first name. She struggles to establish herself against the overwhelming personality of a dead woman. Only by learning the truth does she claim her identity. Gothic tradition: Manderley is a classic Gothic setting, isolated, beautiful, and oppressive. Mrs. Danvers is the Gothic housekeeper. Rebecca is the ghost. Appearances versus reality: Rebecca was adored publicly but cruel privately. Maxim seemed cold but was trapped. The narrator seemed weak but becomes strong. Jealousy and power: the novel is a study of jealousy. The narrator's jealousy of Rebecca almost destroys her. Mrs. Danvers' love for Rebecca becomes destructive. Class and gender: the narrator must learn the codes of the English upper class. Rebecca mastered them and used them for power. The novel examines how women negotiate power in a patriarchal world. Characters: the narrator, second Mrs. de Winter. Young, naive, grows in strength. Maxim de Winter, owner of Manderley. Brooding, guilty, ultimately loving toward the narrator. Rebecca de Winter, the first wife. Dead before the novel begins. Beautiful, talented, cruel, immoral. Mrs. Danvers, housekeeper. Obsessed with Rebecca. The main antagonist. Jack Favell, Rebecca's cousin and lover. Dishonest, violent, a blackmailer. Frank Crawley, estate manager. Loyal, decent, fond of the narrator. Beatrice Lacey, Maxim's sister. Blunt but kind. Colonel Julian, local magistrate. represents law and order. Conclusion. Rebecca is a novel about the past's power over the present. Rebecca dies before the first page, but she controls the story until the last. The narrator wins her husband and her self-respect, but the price is the destruction of Manderley. The famous opening line is also the novel's theme: "We can never really go back, except in dreams."